Hey team, and welcome back to the channel for episode 2. Today we are going to be starting the teardown on my wife's 1987 TRX250R engine. I'll give you a little backstory on this particular power plant. We purchased the machine probably 13 years ago from a good family friend of ours. It was in a 1986 chassis titled as an 86, and it needed a top end rebuild. I ordered all the parts and pieces for a 1986 before I took it apart. Tore it down, put the piston and cylinder on it, and it was too long. 1986 is a short rod motor. 87 through 89 actually have a longer connecting rod, and they compensate for this by moving the wrist pin location in the piston. It's not a huge deal. It's the same bore and stroke between those 2 years, minus the change in the wrist pin, which is 4 millimeters. So we run a 4 millimeter spacer plate between the cases and the base of the cylinder. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, we lost a base gasket between the case and the spacer plate. We were out riding in the dunes, and she said it was popping. And it was actually sucking air and running lean. It probably sucked some sand up at that time, but we shut it off as quick as we could. We got it back to camp. At that time, I had an 07 LTR 450. And if you saw the last episode, you know we have a bunch of other ATVs and dirt bikes. So she's just been riding those for the last 4 or 5 years, and this has been kind of sitting on a back burner. About a month ago, I tore it down, rebuilt the top end, replaced the base gaskets on it, put it back together. It ran for a whole whopping 30 minutes, and it locked up the bottom bearing between the connecting rod and the crank. It died, and she tried kicking it over, wouldn't start, and it was really, really hard to kick. The longer it sat and the colder it got, the harder it got to kick. At that time, I was honestly thinking that it was probably seizing the top end, and the colder it got, the tighter the piston was getting to the cylinder wall. So we pushed it back up into the garage. We tore the top end off it as quick as I could, trying to get it off before it totally seized up. And I found the top end was still in great shape, but this had locked itself up. We were pretty committed to a teardown at that point, so I did not get a chance to do a whole lot of cleaning on it before we started this project like I would like to, or like I typically do, but we are going to get into it. It's been sitting here for a couple of weeks while I've been waiting for my kit to show up, but it is now here, so we can get started. One thing I will say before we get started, guys, I haven't split the cases on one of these in probably 10 years, the last time I did mine. So I am going to be kind of remembering some things and learning some things as we go. I also highly recommend one of these. I've had this book. Well, actually, my dad bought it when he bought my 250R. We've had it for years. It's oily, it's greasy. There's pages marked on it. They're awesome. You can learn a lot from the internet, from YouTube, but sometimes throwing the picture right in front of your face or reading the description is your best bet. So if you are going to get into this, I think anybody with a little bit of mechanical ability and some hand tools can do a teardown on one of these, but I would strongly recommend order yourself a service and repair manual. It'll go a long ways. We're going to break it up into a couple different episodes. This episode is really probably going to be a lot of getting rid of the easy accessory stuff. We're going to ditch the sprocket, the shifter, the Kickstarter, the stator, probably the clutch cover. We might get into that side a little bit. And then we'll probably do episode 2. We'll be actually tearing apart the cases, splitting them, and starting to replace all the bearings and seals. We did get a full bearing and seal kit for it, so we will be able to replace everything, which is good. The shift shaft was starting to leak around that seal a little bit. We all are also going to try and upgrade a few things. It has this kind of cheap factory style case saver on it. I would like to go to something a little bit beefier, and I also want to put a better sprocket cover on it. She always rides in boots, but I just don't want to risk something getting caught up in there. So we're going to make some improvements while we're in here, and I think it's going to be really cool. So stay tuned. We will start getting tore it down on this thing. I'm probably either going to speed it up a little bit or throw some music over it so you don't have to listen to me chatter through this whole time, but let's get into it. Most of this stuff is actually pretty well lubed up. And I also got myself a little parts organizer So hopefully we don't start losing bolts. If you see me dip in and out of the frame a lot, it's because my toolbox is over here on the left side. I'm usually grabbing stuff, so. I'm also not going to cover it up, guys. If I have some trouble with something, I'm going to leave it on the video so you guys can see too. Also, if I'm not very strong, I just broke my arm 3 weeks ago, so I'm trying not to use it any more than I have to. So whenever I take something like this apart, I have my bolt, I have my shifter, just for the simplicity of it. Just throw them back together, that way I know that bolt went with that part. The stuff that is really super oily and greasy, like these bottom bolts, because that seal was going bad, we are going to separate them for now, and I will throw them. We have an ultrasonic parts cleaner over here in the corner. I will throw them in there and get them cleaned up good before we do any kind of reassembly on it. The bolts that are typically a little bit harder to get out, the sprocket bolt and the kickstart bolt, I broke those loose while it was still in the frame. I don't have an engine stand. Sometimes this thing is kind of hard to hold on to, especially if you only have 1.5 hands right now. So those have already been broke loose, so they should come off fairly easy. Those are pretty gross, so we're definitely going to do some heavy cleaning on those. I drained all the fluids out of it while it was still in the chassis. Way easier than trying to balance it and put a catch can underneath it. And hey guys, if you have the extra coin, David Moore Racing, DMR, he makes an engine stand, which looks awesome. And you won't be juggling around with wood blocks the whole time. I have a portable sawmill, so we have a lot of wood blocks at our disposal. Let's flip this around so you guys can see. And we start on this clutch cover side. Guys, if you see me doing something goofy, like I said, it's been about a decade, so don't hesitate to drop something down in the comments and let me know if there's a better way to do it. I also have an 84 250R that I hope I won't have to split the cases on, but it has been quite a while, and it probably wouldn't hurt to replace the crank seals in it so we don't suck up any air. So if you know any tricks or cool stuff, let me know. Don't hesitate. I say I drain the oil on this, but if you're ever taking one of these apart, everybody knows there will always be a little bit of oil left in there, and we will make a little bit of a mess. That's okay, we have some rags on hand, and it happens. The cases on this bike are actually in really good shape. When I pull the oil plug on it, I notice it's still the original oil plug. It is still the original threads. Mine has a insert in the case because somebody stripped out the case, taking the oil plug out. Be careful with that stuff, guys. If it feels really tight, work it back and forth, both directions. I mean, even hit it with some penetrating oil. Let it set for a little bit. I always say if you're getting in a rush on these things, stop and take a breath. Everything on this is pushing 30 plus years old now, so it's getting older, and sometimes they are a little bit harder to break down. So just keep working with it, guys. Let me grab some rags in case we dump some oil. It's all aluminum on these cases, guys, so I like to break all the bolts loose before I start pulling stuff out, trying to avoid any kind of warping. And also when I put it back together, I won't be using the impact. because the cases are in nice shape and I don't want to ruin them. All this stuff is getting way harder to come by than it used to be. I drained the oil on it and no metal chunks, so that's always good. It was a little metallic, but whenever you're running a wet clutch like this, you will get some clutch fibers in it. It happens, guys. I wouldn't worry too much about it. The kit I got did not come with any water pump seals, so we're going to try not to mess with that too much. It wasn't leaking before, and it was cooling just fine, so we're going to leave that alone to the best of our abilities. These can be a little stuck, especially if it's been a long time since you've got it off. Just be careful. I use a rubber mallet. There are a couple spots where the aluminum is a little bit thicker, especially like around the water neck and water pump area. If you can start getting it loose there. And that water pump shaft runs all the way through. That's how it times. So that's all got to be lined up. So just take your time with it, guys. I am not a huge fan of using screwdrivers around a sealing surface like that, especially when you're working with aluminum. There's a really good chance you could nick it and it's going to be very hard to get apart. But we're getting it little by little. And just like that, we have our clutch cover off. And it actually looks pretty darn good. Just like I thought, we definitely got some oil left over in there. The bottom of the case is super hard to get everything out of, just out of a drain plug, especially while it's still in the machine. You can't really tip it up or tilt it. I will probably pull you guys off the stand and get in here a little bit closer so you can kind of see what I'm looking at in this clutch basket and what we should be looking for if there's any maintenance or parts replacement required. Okay, team, so here we're in a little bit closer. This is kind of what I'm looking at. So these are your steels and your frictions. So the ones you see sticking out are the friction plates. And when we pull this front cover off, you'll get a little bit better look at it. But the ones you see sticking out are your friction plates. They can start to chatter inside this hub. You see how all that kind of moves a little bit and build up some pretty severe ridges. This one isn't too bad, especially for the age of the bike and the way my wife is on the clutch. It's actually not all that bad. I've taken them apart before where the ridges are so deep that your frictions are actually getting stuck inside the ridges and it's preventing your clutch plates from moving back and forth and freeing up. While I got you in here close, we can kind of take a little bit better look at this crank and connecting rod. You can see the discoloration on the bottom of the connecting rod where that bearing started to lock up and it started getting really, really hot. This is already not an OEM rod. This is, I don't know if it'll focus. It's a Hot Rods rod. I'm assuming it's probably a whole Hot Rods crank in there, which is what we're going to be replacing it with. This bike had a lot of hours on it, and like I say, it probably sucked in some dirt. You can see how dirty the cases are down in there. So we're going to do a full cleanup on this, and we're going to clean up the flywheel as well. It's dirty and gross, and I don't like putting dirty stuff back in. So I'll throw you guys back on the stand so I can use both hands, and we'll keep going on it. Okay, guys, next step, we're going to work on getting this clutch basket off of there. My rod is kind of locked up, so it's going to hold most of this in place. And they probably make a special tool for it. But if you don't have access to one, whenever you start pulling this stuff apart and it's not being held very well anymore, you can do like I did and raid your wife's wallet or your kid's piggy bank and grab a couple of pennies. They're pretty soft, and you can stick them between the gears and between the teeth, and they will bend or crush before you hurt the gears, and that will kind of help hold everything in place while you start breaking some of these loose. These are 10 mil and they are being held by a spring. I break them loose by hand first. I have had the studs on the center hub where these go into break off before and then the hub is ruined. So we'll break them loose by hand first. And you can run them all the way out by hand if you would like to. These ones actually aren't very tight at all. But it will throw the socket on impact and we'll get through it a little bit quicker. So, like I mentioned before, this is my wife's bike. I don't run all of the heavy-duty springs in here. It is a Barnett clutch, but I think we ran 3 factory springs and 2 heavier Barnett springs and just staggered them so that the clutch pull on it would still be a little bit easier. Okay, once you have your springs out, the pressure plate should come off. If it's a little bit sticky, sometimes the oil can be sticky, you can grab your clutch actuator over here and give it a pull. That's actually what works your clutch, and you will see the pressure plate come out. So we can get that off. Your pressure plate is like your steels. If you've been riding your clutch really hard, you will see bluing like it's been overheated. I've never had that happen before, but I do know guys have sometimes scuffed them up, like with a light sandpaper, to try and get rid of some of those hot spots. I imagine it would probably work. It's probably like a flywheel on a car. Once you get your pressure plate off, you can start pulling your frictions and your steels. They go every other. So like these steels are dimpled. It's actually the steel, and it was still hooked to the friction. These steels are dimpled, and if you notice the teeth on the inside of the steel, they grab this inside hub. So when you lock them all together, the outer basket and the inside hub turn as one, and that's the point of the frictions in the steels. There's still quite a bit of fiber left on these, so we will probably put them back in. I don't see much point in replacing them. It wasn't slipping at the time. I will say, if you are going to put them back in, try and keep your stack in order. Friction steel, friction steels. That last one's going to be a little bit tricky to get out. Okay. Once you get all your frictions, your steels, and your pressure plate out, some of these are retrofitted a little bit different, and there will be a flat bearing that sets on the inside of this and runs against your pressure plate hub. This one has not been retrofitted. So, still inside the case at the other end, there should be a small ball bearing that rides on the inside of this rod. That keeps this rod from spinning and fusing everything together. These are 2 separate parts, and when you get the retrofit kit, you will replace this. My bike has that in it. I don't know if it was a later model thing or if Honda just decided it would be better. Once you get that rod out, you can take your clutch actuator out. It's kind of hard to tell on camera. There is, see that little divot in it? So that's where the rod rides, and as you actuate it, it pushes it out towards the pressure plate and releases your clutch. I'm going to grab a couple more tools. We are going to need a lot bigger socket to get this center nut off, and I think that's our next step. Okay guys, I wanted to take a quick minute and show you how helpful one of these manuals can be. So as you can see, we are working on the 87 to 88. So that should have the small ball bearing between the shaft and that outer plunger cap. This is the one I was talking about for 1989. You get that little bearing that rides between the pressure plate and the end cap. I'm not sure why, but last time I went into the Honda dealership to order all the parts and pieces for mine, they told me they were not doing the older style anymore and that all the 89 parts would fit in mine. So they've kind of upgraded everybody to that style of setup. I haven't had any problems with it since. I don't really see any wear on this motor, but just a heads up, and that is the cool thing about having the manual here in front of you. Just wanted to give you guys a quick glimpse at that before we get back to the motor. I wanted to show you guys this little part. This is the center of the clutch basket hub. It's going to be really hard to see when I put the camera back up on the stand. So the way this works, you have a small washer behind your nut. It has two ears that go around that spline on the clutch basket. And then on the other side, actually down near the bottom, you can see it has a tab that's pushed up flat against the nut. This one is pretty beat up. I think somebody's been in this quite a few times and used a hammer and chisel on it and knocked the holy heck out of it. We will pull it off, see if we can straighten out those ears and clean it up. If not, guys, then I probably have one in a box somewhere. I have a couple extra motors that are just tore down for parts, so we can probably find something to make it work, or we'll try and clean this one up. I am going to throw you back up on the stand because it's going to be a two-handed job, but wanted to give you a little bit closer look. Full disclosure, guys, I grabbed my impact off camera and loosened up this center nut just because it's super loud. I knocked that ear back on the bottom that was holding the nut. It's just a right-hand thread nut, and they really aren't all that tight. The problem is if you try and just turn it with a wrench by hand, you're just going to spin the center hub. It's loose enough that I could hold the center hub just with my bare hand and hit it with the impact, and it came loose. So we'll pull it off the rest of the way. And I think Motion Pro makes a tool for holding the center hub. If you do have one that's really stubborn or somebody over tightened, I'll get this backed off. And you can see what is behind the clutch hub. So we got that nut. Then you will pull off the lock ring. And there is a small washer behind that. You should be able to pull your hub off. Center section anyhow. It's splined, and it goes on this splined shaft. This one actually looks pretty good. I've seen it before. It has a few scratches in it. I've seen it before where I had a counterbalance gear come apart on one and it got some debris between the inner and outer hub and just trashed all of this. And I'll show you, this is the back side of the studs that you're seeing right now, or rivets. So take this apart one at a time. This is your outer clutch basket. There are rivets that hold this gear on the back. Inside of that is another set of gears and bearings. We'll check the condition on them while we have it apart. Typically not a huge maintenance item. This set of gears fits over that shaft and rides on your kickstart gear. When you put your basket on, if I can get my basket back on, your basket, the gear on the back rides on this gear, which comes off of your crankshaft. It has another gear behind it, which rides on this gear, which is your counterbalance. This hole here in the middle lines up for your water pump on your clutch cover. And I'll show you that really quick. So you see how your water pump has that split on it? If you look down inside your counterbalance, you will see a straight pin running across. That goes inside that split, and that's what spins your water pump. You got to make sure that's lined up before you try and put your water pump off, or you'll break those ears off of that water pump shaft. There are some timing marks on the crankshaft gear and the water or the counterbalance gear, and I'll show you those. They're super easy to see. It's Honda made these things almost foolproof, guys. I'll show you that. Let's get this clutch basket off and put off to the side. Okay guys, here is a close-up of all of the gears behind the clutch basket. I'm gonna try and get these two dimples in there. You see those two small dimples on those gears? Those are your timing marks that line up your counterbalance to your crankshaft. That's important, guys. These motors are counterbalanced, which keeps the vibration down on them. If for some reason you mistime that, this thing, I mean, I've never done it, but I would assume it will probably rattle itself apart. So if you get done reassembling your machine and all of a sudden it shakes like crazy, that's probably not a bad place to start. Make sure that you have all of that lined up. I think that's going to do it for episode 2. I'm going to try and break it down into major components. That way, if you guys want to see how to take the clutch assembly apart, you don't have to watch a whole video of nonsense. And if you just want to see how to take your kickstarter gear off or your counterbalance, you can skip ahead to the next episode. So episode 3, we will be covering the rest of the gear setup on this side, including the shifter mechanism. And episode 4, we will probably cover the stator. We'll see how long it takes to get all this apart. So tune in next time, guys, and thank you for watching.